Have you ever seen a car that looked like it came from the future, years ahead of everything else on the road? A car so bold, so revolutionary that it made people stop and stare? In 1957, one such car rolled off the production lines and changed the automotive world forever. The Plymouth Fury wasn't just another stylish machine, it was a glimpse into the future. But here's the real question. How did a car from the late 1957 Plymouth predict what we see on the roads today? How did its design, technology, and performance set the stage for the muscle cars, luxury sedans, and even modern sports cars that came decades later? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why the 1957 Plymouth Fury was ahead of its time, and how it shaped the future of automobiles in ways few people realize. Stay with me till the end, and I'll reveal a surprising connection between this classic machine and the cars we drive today. Once you hear it, you'll never look at modern cars the same way again. The 1950s, an era of change. To understand why the 1957 Plymouth Fury was so groundbreaking, we need to go back to the 1950s, a time of rapid change. The world was shifting, technology was advancing, space exploration was taking off, and the idea of the future was on everyone's mind. In the United States, the post-war boom meant people had more money to spend, and they wanted cars that felt exciting, powerful, and futuristic. This was the era of tail fins, chrome, and bold designs. Automakers weren't just building cars, they were creating rolling works of art, machines that captured the imagination. But while many brands followed trends, Plymouth wanted to lead, and that's where the Fury comes in. Plymouth's bold gamble. By the mid-1950s, Plymouth was seen as a solid, dependable brand, but it lacked excitement. It wasn't a name people associated with style or performance. It was the car of practicality, not passion. But Chrysler, Plymouth's parent company, had bigger ambition. They wanted to shake things up, to challenge the dominance of Ford and Chevrolet. So they turned to one man, Virgil Exner. If you've ever admired the sleek, space-age designs of classic American cars, you have Exner to thank. He was the mastermind behind Chrysler's forward-look design philosophy, a radical shift that would transform the entire auto industry. Exner believed that cars should look fast, even when standing still. He wanted vehicles that reflected the optimism of the 1957 cars, that felt like they belonged in the jet age, not the past. And the 1957 Plymouth Fury was his ultimate creation. A car so dramatic, so futuristic, that it stunned the industry. A car that looked like the future. When the 1957 Fury hit the streets, it didn't just look different, it felt different. It was lower, longer, and wider than anything else at the time. It had sharp tail fins, sweeping lines, and a stance that made it look like it was ready to take off like a rocket. It was bold, it was aggressive, and it was unlike anything Plymouth had ever made before. Even the advertising campaign played into this futuristic vision. Plymouth confidently declared, "Suddenly, it's 1960. Think about that for a moment. In 1957, they were already telling people they were looking at the future, and they weren't wrong. The styling cues introduced by the Fury, sleek aerodynamics, dramatic tail fins, and a stance designed for speed, would influence car design for years to come. This was more than just marketing hype. The Fury was built with a psychological understanding of what people wanted at the time. The 1950s were all about progress, television, aviation, space travel, and the Fury tapped into that energy. It made people feel like they were driving something ahead of its time, what made it truly special. But here's where things get really interesting. The Fury wasn't just about looks. It had the power and innovation to back it up. Under the hood, Plymouth packed a 318 cubic inch V8 engine with dual 4-barrel carburetors, pushing out an impressive 290 horsepower. For context, in 1957, most cars on the road had far less power. This was a machine built for performance, something that would later inspire the muscle car revolution of the 1960s. In many ways, you could argue that the Fury was the first glimpse of the American muscle car movement. And then there was the transmission, a push-button automatic, a feature that felt like science fiction at the time. Drivers didn't shift with a traditional lever. Instead, they pressed a button on the dashboard. It felt futuristic, almost like piloting a spaceship. This wasn't just a gimmick, it was a sign of where the industry was heading. Today we have electronic gear selectors, touchscreens, and voice-activated controls, all things that, in a way, can be traced back to innovations like the Fury's push-buckle transmission. Why this car still matters today? Looking back, it's clear that the 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just another car, it was a turning point. It proved that cars could be more than just transportation. They could be statements of ambition, reflections of the future, and symbols of innovation. So, how does this car connect to the vehicles we drive today? Why do elements of its design and engineering still influence modern muscle cars, performance sedans, and even electric vehicles? Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll dive deeper into how the Fury's design and technology set the foundation for the cars we love today. And trust me, you'll be surprised at the lasting impact this machine has had on the auto industry. The 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just an accident of history. It was the result of a bold vision, one that defied industry norms and changed the way cars were designed forever. But to understand why this car was so ahead of its time, we need to look at the man behind it. His name was Virgil Exner, and he wasn't just another car designer. He was a visionary, someone who believed that cars should do more than just move people from place to place. They should inspire, excite, and capture the spirit of the future. At the time, the American auto industry was locked in a battle of bigger, bulkier, and more excessive designs. Cars were getting taller, heavier, and covered in chrome. They looked grand, but they didn't look fast. Exner saw this and knew something had to change. He believed that a car should look like motion itself, even when standing still. This idea became the foundation of what Chrysler called the forward look. It was a completely new approach to car design, one that would push the limits of aerodynamics, styling, and engineering. And at the center of it all was the 1957 Plymouth Fury, the car that would introduce this radical philosophy to the world. Breaking the rules of car design up until the mid-1950s, most cars followed a boxy, upright shape. The idea was simple. Tall cars provided more headroom and big fenders made them feel solid and reliable. But Exner wasn't interested in tradition. He wanted something sleek, dramatic, and low to the ground. So he did something unheard of. He lowered the car's height by nearly 5 inches compared to previous models. This may not sound like much today, but at the time it was revolutionary. It completely changed the car's stance, making it look longer, wider, and more aggressive. Then came the tail fins. These weren't just decoration. They were engineered for aerodynamic stability, inspired by aircraft design. In fact, Exner had studied the way fighter jets sliced through the air and applied those same principles to the Fury's body. The result? A car that didn't just look futuristic, it felt futuristic. For drivers of the 1950s, getting behind the wheel of a Fury was unlike anything they had experienced before. It was lower, sleeker, and more refined. It didn't just look fast, it felt fast, even at a standstill. Why this design mattered. The 1957 Fury was more than just a styling exercise. It was a statement of intent, a sign that Plymouth was ready to challenge the biggest names in the industry. And it worked. When the Fury debuted, people took notice. Ford and Chevrolet, the two giants of American car manufacturing, were suddenly caught off guard. Their designs, which had seemed modern just a year earlier, now looked dated and sluggish compared to Plymouth's radical new approach. Car buyers responded immediately. Sales skyrocketed, and suddenly Plymouth was no longer seen as just a budget-friendly brand. It was now a symbol of progress, innovation, and high-performance design. And this was just the beginning. The influence of the 1957 Fury's design rippled across the industry. Within just a few years, other automakers rushed to copy its low-slung stance, its dramatic tail fins, and its futuristic styling. The entire look of American cars changed overnight, all because of this one bold vision. Engineering meets style, a perfect balance. But here's what made the Fury truly special. It wasn't just about looks. It was also a brilliant piece of engineering. A car can look as futuristic as you want, but if it doesn't perform, it won't stand the test of time. Plymouth knew this, which is why the Fury was more than just a pretty face. It was designed to handle like a true performance car. Its low center of gravity improved stability at high speeds. The streamlined body reduced wind resistance, making it faster and more fuel efficient than its competitors. Every design choice had a purpose. It wasn't just about style, it was about speed, control, and aerodynamics. Even the placement of the headlights was carefully considered. They weren't just positioned for aesthetics, they were designed to cut through the darkness more effectively, giving drivers better visibility at night. These small details may not have seemed revolutionary at the time, but they set the foundation for modern car design. Today, we take things like low drag coefficients, aerodynamic bodywork, and optimized visibility for granted. But in 1957, Plymouth was one of the first companies to think about these things on a deeper level. The psychological impact, why it worked? There's another reason why the 1957 Fury was such a game changer. It made people feel something. Most cars at the time were designed to be practical, reliable, and familiar. They were made for transportation, not for excitement. But the Fury tapped into something deeper, a psychological craving for progress and speed. Psychologists have long studied the connection between design and emotion. People are naturally drawn to sleek, flowing shapes because they represent motion, energy, and freedom. The Fury's design played into these subconscious desires, making drivers feel like they were part of something bigger, a new era of technology and performance. This is the same principle that makes sports cars so appealing today. Whether it's a Dodge Challenger, a Porsche 911, or even an electric Tesla, these cars all share one thing in common: they create an emotional reaction. And it all started with cars like the Fury. A bold step into the future, the 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just another new model. It was a revolution. It forced the industry to rethink how cars should look, how they should perform, and how they should make people feel. It was bold, it was innovative, and it was decades ahead of its time. Many cars have tried to change the game, but few have succeeded like the Fury did. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement of what the future could be. And the most incredible part? Its impact didn't stop there. Because beneath that stunning design, under the sleek bodywork and futuristic tail fins, was something even more impressive: an engine that would redefine American performance forever. A car can have the most futuristic design in the world, but without power, it's just a sculpture on heels. The 1957 Plymouth Fury was never meant to be just admired. It was built to be driven hard, pushed to its limits, and felt deep in the soul of the driver. Underneath that sleek, low-slung body was an engine that defined a new era of American performance. It wasn't just about horsepower. It was about revolutionizing the way people experience speed. A new standard for power. At the heart of the 1957 Fury was an engine that took Plymouth beyond its reputation for affordability and thrust it into the high-performance world. It came equipped with a 318 cubic inch V8, a powerhouse that was more than just numbers on a spec sheet. It was a statement of intent. This wasn't just another V8. This was Plymouth stepping into the muscle car game before the term even existed. The 318 V8 was fitted with dual 4-barrel carburetors, a setup usually reserved for racing machines. The result? A factory-rated 290 horsepower, an astonishing figure for the time. To put this into perspective, just a few years earlier, most family sedans barely pushed 150 horsepower. Even the legendary 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, one of the Fury's biggest rivals, had to be specially ordered with a high-performance 283 V8 to match the Fury's power. Plymouth wasn't just keeping up with the competition, they were setting the bar higher. Why the Fury felt so fast, numbers alone don't tell the full story of why the 1957 Fury felt so exhilarating to drive. It wasn't just about raw horsepower, it was about how that power was delivered. The Fury was engineered with a lightweight body, something Plymouth achieved by refining their materials and chassis design. This meant that every ounce of power translated directly to acceleration. When a driver pressed the accelerator, the Fury responded immediately. The dual 4-barrel carburetors gulped in air, the high compression pistons fired with force, and the car surged forward with an urgency that most 1950s vehicles simply couldn't match. But it wasn't just straight-line speed that made the Fury special. It was also one of the most balanced handling American cars of its time. Handling like a true performance car, In the 1950s, most American cars were built for comfort, not for aggressive driving. They had soft suspensions, excessive body roll, and steering that felt disconnected from the road. The Fury, however, was different. Plymouth engineers knew that performance wasn't just about acceleration, it was about control. So they gave the Fury a sportier suspension setup. They refined the torsion bar front suspension, making the car feel planted and stable at high speeds. This setup was ahead of its time and laid the groundwork for the handling improvements that would define muscle cars in the coming decade. Then there was the braking system. Unlike many cars of the era that relied on weak drum brakes, prone to fading, the Fury had upgraded finned drums that provided better cooling and improved stopping power. This gave drivers the confidence to push the car harder, knowing they had the control to bring it back down safely. These innovations may seem normal today, but in the late 1950s, they were groundbreaking. The Fury wasn't just another big American V8, it was a complete package of power, handling, and precision engineering. How it compared to the competition. The 1950s car market was a battleground. Ford and Chevrolet had their own powerful V8s, and Chrysler's own Hemi engines were legendary for their brute force. But Plymouth did something different. They created a car that bridged the gap between muscle and finesse. The Fury wasn't just about putting the biggest engine in the heaviest car. It was about designing something that felt responsive, agile, and connected to the driver. When put up against rivals like the Chevrolet Bel Air and the Ford Fairlane, the Fury stood out. It had more aggressive styling, more advanced suspension and handling, more power per cubic inch than many competitors. This wasn't just a car. It was Plymouth proving to the world that they could build something extraordinary. The psychological thrill of driving the Fury. Driving isn't just a mechanical experience, it's an emotional one. There's a reason car lovers feel a rush when they hear the deep growl of a V8. Or when they feel a surge of power pushing them into their seat. Psychologists have studied this effect for decades. The human brain craves excitement and adrenaline, and the Fury delivered it in ways most cars of its time simply couldn't. From the moment the engine roared to life, it demanded attention. The deep, rumbling exhaust note wasn't just noise. It was a promise of power. The sensation of pressing the accelerator and feeling the car launch forward activated the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine, the same chemical responsible for feelings of excitement and pleasure. For car lovers, this wasn't just transportation. It was a thrill, a rush, a connection between man and machine that couldn't be explained, only experienced. And that's why the 1957 Fury left such a lasting impression. It wasn't just another car. It was an emotion on wheels. Why the Fury was a glimpse into the future? Looking back, it's easy to see that the 1957 Plymouth Fury was years ahead of its time. It set the foundation for what would later become the muscle car era. It proved that a car could be both stylish and powerful. It showed that aerodynamics and engineering mattered just as much as brute force. And it demonstrated that a car wasn't just a tool, it was a source of excitement, passion, and freedom. The Fury was a glimpse into the future of high-performance American cars, a future where cars would become more than just machines. They would become legends. And yet, despite all its innovations, despite all its raw power, the Fury had something even more incredible. An influence that stretched beyond performance. Because what Plymouth did next would shake the entire automotive world to its core. Power alone isn't enough to make a car legendary. A truly great car doesn't just perform well, it looks the part. It turns heads. It makes a statement before the engine even starts. The 1957 Plymouth Fury was more than a high-performance machine. It was a revolution in automotive design. This car didn't just predict the future of styling, it reshaped the industry. It set a new standard for how cars should look, feel, and inspire. It didn't follow trends, it created them. And the moment people saw it, they knew. The automotive world would never be the same again. The birth of the forward look before the Fury, Plymouth was known for making reliable, practical cars, but not for style. In the early 1950s, they were seen as conservative compared to the sleek designs coming from Ford and Chevrolet. That all changed with one man, Virgil Exner. Exner wasn't just another car designer, he was a visionary. He believed that cars should look fast even when they were standing still. that they should have motion, energy, and personality built into their very shape. He called his design philosophy the forward look. And when the 1957 Fury rolled off the production line, it wasn't just a new car, it was a shockwave. Why the 1957 Fury looked so radical? Most cars in the early 1950s had boxy, upright shapes. They were tall, rounded, and looked like something from the past. But the Fury? It was lower, sleeker, and sharper. The roofline was dramatically lower than previous models. This made the car look faster and more aggressive. The body was stretched out, with long, flowing lines that made it look like it was built for speed. The front grille was bold and distinctive, giving the car an unmistakable presence on the road. And then, there were the tail fins. The Fury's fins weren't just for decoration. They were a statement. They made the car look futuristic, powerful, and unstoppable. They were bold, sharp, and unlike anything Plymouth had ever done before. These fins weren't just for show. They were functional. Engineers designed them to help stabilize the car at high speeds, giving it better aerodynamics. This wasn't just styling. This was science. How the Fury influenced the industry. When the 1957 Fury hit the streets, other car companies had no choice but to take notice. Suddenly, Plymouth wasn't just competing with Chevrolet and Ford, they were outpacing them. Ford and Chevrolet had good-looking cars, but the Fury was something else. It looked faster, more advanced, more dangerous. Automakers realized that people wanted cars that looked exciting. They wanted style, attitude, and presence. Within just a few years, every major American car company copied the Fury's design language. Cadillac made their tail fins bigger. Chevrolet redesigned the Bel Air to look lower and sleeker. Ford added more aggressive styling to keep up. Even Chrysler's own brands Dodge, DeSoto, and Chrysler itself started using the forward-look styling. The Fury wasn't just a car, it was a movement. The psychological impact of the Fury's design. Why do some cars instantly make an emotional impact? Why do some designs stick in our minds forever? It's because the human brain is wired to respond to beauty, speed, and power. Psychologists have studied why certain designs make us feel excitement, and the answer comes down to proportions, angles, and subconscious triggers. The low, wide stance of the Fury made it look strong and aggressive. Our brains associate wide shapes with power and dominance. That's why sports cars always sit lower than regular cars. The tail fins created a sense of movement, even when the car was parked. This triggers a feeling of energy and motion, making the car seem alive. The sharp angles and chrome details reflected light in a way that made the car look sleek and futuristic. Our brains connect bright metallic surfaces with technology and progress. This wasn't just about making a car look good. This was about making a car feel exciting on a deep psychological level. And that's exactly why the 1957 Plymouth Fury left such a lasting impact. How the Fury pushed the limits of materials and technology. Great design isn't just about looks, it's about engineering. A car can have the most beautiful shape in the world, but if it's not built right, it's worthless. Plymouth didn't just redesign their cars in 1957, they re-engineered them. They introduced new construction techniques that made the Fury lighter, stronger, and more aerodynamic. Thinner roof pillars gave the car a sleeker look while keeping structural integrity. Advanced unibody construction made the car stiffer and safer. Lighter materials reduced weight, improving speed and handling. These changes set the stage for the next 2 decades of automotive design. They made cars safer, faster, and more efficient. And it all started with the Fury's bold new vision. Why the Fury's design still matters today, decades later. We look back at the 1957 Plymouth Fury, and it still feels ahead of its time. It proved that cars could be more than just transportation. They could be works of art. It redefined how aerodynamics, engineering, and beauty could work together. It shaped the future of American cars, influencing everything from muscle cars to luxury sedans. Even today, car designers study the Fury. They look at how it balanced aggression with elegance, speed with stability. And that's why the 1957 Fury isn't just a car from the past. It's a vision of the future. But what happened next was even more shocking. The Fury had changed the way cars looked forever, but in just a few short years, its legacy would take an unexpected turn. Success can be a double-edged sword. A car that sets new standards also raises expectations. People don't just want more, they demand it. And when something revolutionary enters the market, it carries a risk. What if it's not perfect? The 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just another car. It was an engineering marvel, a symbol of speed, power, and futuristic design. It stunned competitors and reshaped the industry. But behind the beauty and performance, a storm was brewing. Because sometimes, innovation moves too fast, and when that happens, the cracks start to show. How demand outpaced quality? The Plymouth Fury was an instant hit. It was the most desirable Plymouth ever built. People rushed to dealerships, eager to get behind the wheel of something that felt truly ahead of its time. Chrysler Corporation saw an opportunity. They had already leapfrogged Ford and Chevrolet in styling and performance. Now they wanted to dominate the entire market. But there was one problem: production speed. The 1957 Fury wasn't just a new model. It was built on an entirely new platform. Everything about it, from the sweeping tail fins to the advanced unibody construction, was designed from scratch. This meant that Chrysler's factories had to work faster than ever before. They rushed to build more cars more quickly to meet skyrocketing demand. And in doing so, they made a critical mistake: the cost of pushing innovation too far, too fast. The Fury's futuristic design came with new materials and assembly techniques, but manufacturing wasn't ready to handle them at scale. Chrysler's engineers were trying to redefine car building, but their suppliers and factory workers were still learning the process. The thin roof pillars and lightweight body panels looked stunning, but were prone to flexing and misalignment. The unibody construction made the car lighter and more agile, but early production methods left structural weaknesses. The paint and chrome finishes had a hard time bonding to the new materials, leading to premature rust. For buyers, the problems weren't obvious at first, but within a year or two, owners started noticing serious issues. The Fury's biggest enemy: rust and reliability problems. Imagine buying a brand new futuristic muscle car only to see it start falling apart after just a couple of winters. That's exactly what happened to thousands of Plymouth owners. The biggest flaw? Rust. Chrysler's rush to build more cars meant that proper rust-proofing was overlooked. The Fury's beautiful flowing body panels were made with thinner steel, which allowed moisture and road salt to eat away at the car from the inside out. It wasn't just cosmetic. The frame and suspension components also corroded at an alarming rate. In regions with heavy snowfall like the Midwest, Canada, and Northern Europe, many Furies were nearly undrivable after just a few years. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a disaster. Owners felt betrayed. They had bought a revolutionary car expecting durability. Instead, they got a ticking time bomb. Mechanics struggled to fix the cars because parts rusted faster than they could be replaced. Plymouth's reputation took a massive hit. The Fury was supposed to lead the industry. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. How the Fury's flaws changed the industry. Car companies watched the 1957 Plymouth Furies rise and fall very carefully. Ford and Chevrolet had been caught off guard by Plymouth's bold styling, but now they saw an opening. They realized that speeding ahead wasn't enough. Reliability mattered just as much. This moment changed how American cars were built. Rust-proofing became a major focus in the 1960s. Companies introduced better coatings, galvanized steel, and improved drainage systems to prevent water buildup. Quality control tightened. Automakers slowed down production slightly to ensure better assembly. Longer warranties were introduced to assure buyers that cars wouldn't fall apart within a few years. Chrysler learned this lesson the hard way. The company was forced to rebuild trust with customers after the 1957 models developed their reputation for rust and mechanical failures. And yet, despite all of this, the 1957 Fury never lost its status as a legend. Why the Fury still captivates car enthusiasts today. If the 1957 Fury had been just another car, it would have been forgotten. Instead, it became one of the most talked about classic cars in history. Why? Because even with its flaws, it changed everything. It showed that style and performance could go hand in hand. It proved that cars didn't have to be boring, boxy, or conservative. It pushed the limits of engineering and design, forcing the industry to evolve. Even today, restored 1957 Furies are highly sought after. Enthusiasts go to great lengths to preserve these cars, knowing they represent a turning point in automotive history. Collectors and restorers don't just see a car, they see a revolution frozen in time. And when a fully restored Fury roars down the road, it reminds us of something important. Greatness isn't about being perfect, it's about being bold enough to change the game. End of section 5. This section maintains the deep storytelling style, historical context, and psychological engagement tailored for car lovers aged 40 to 65. It explains how the Fury's rapid success led to its downfall, but also shaped the future of the automotive industry. Would you like me to proceed with the next section? 4.0. You said, proceed to the next section consists of 800 to 900 words with all above instructions. Create a proper explanatory flow attached with the previous section to look professionally. Don't to mention extra things like, in the next section we discuss what things. You have to give me a ready-made script section, so I just copy and paste to create a voiceover from this section. Leon ChatGPT said, Script Section 177. 7. Plymouth Fury on modern cars. A car isn't just a machine, it's a statement, a reflection of its time, and sometimes, a glimpse into the future. The 1957 Plymouth Fury did both. It captured the optimism of an era, the belief that the future was bright, bold, and limitless. But it also carried lessons, hard-earned ones, that reshaped the auto industry forever. Most cars fade into history. They sell for a few years, then disappear. But the Fury? It refused to be forgotten. Even decades later, its legacy still lingers in the way modern cars are built, marketed, and designed, because when something changes the game once, its influence never truly fades. The rise of automotive design as a selling point. Before the Fury, cars weren't designed to be jaw-dropping. They were practical, built to get people from one place to another. Styling was an afterthought, something left to luxury brands like Cadillac. But the Fury changed that mindset. It proved that design alone could sell cars. The dramatic tail fins became the defining feature of late 1950s cars. The low-slung stance made cars feel sleeker and sportier. The heavy use of chrome and color contrast added personality to the bodywork. Automakers noticed, and soon every major brand poured resources into design. By the 1960s, styling studios within Ford, GM, and Chrysler had become as important as engineering teams. The Fury's radical design had forced an industry-wide realization. People don't just want cars that drive well, they want cars that make them feel something. This philosophy still exists today. Look at modern sports sedans or muscle cars, sleek lines, aggressive grills, bold shapes. The DNA of the Fury never disappeared, it evolved. Engineering improvements sparked by the Fury's challenges. The 1957 Fury's biggest flaw wasn't its design, it was its rushed production. Chrysler had pushed its limits, and in doing so exposed weaknesses in manufacturing, rust-proofing, and structural integrity. These problems weren't just costly for Chrysler, they were a wake-up call for the entire industry. Automakers realized that faster wasn't always better. In the years following the Fury's issues, quality control became a top priority. Frame structures were reinforced to prevent premature wear, rust-resistant coatings became standard, extending a car's lifespan. Stricter production timelines ensured cars weren't just stylish, but durable. By the late 1960s, companies like General Motors and Ford had refined their quality control measures. Even Chrysler, after learning from its mistakes, came back stronger with improved build quality in the 1960s. And yet, despite its issues, the Fury's influence was clear. The industry wouldn't have advanced as quickly without the lessons it forced everyone to learn. The birth of the muscle car era. Performance had always been a selling point, but before the Fury, raw power was reserved for big luxury cars or specialized racing vehicles. The idea of a mid-range, affordable high-performance car, that was still new. The Fury changed that. With its Golden Commando V8, it showed that a regular production car could be fast, stylish, and accessible to the average buyer. It bridged the gap between everyday sedans and high-performance machines. This philosophy paved the way for the muscle car era. By the mid-1960s, Pontiac, Ford, and Chevrolet were all diving headfirst into performance-focused cars. The GTO, Mustang, and Camaro followed the blueprint laid out by the Fury. Big power, aggressive styling, and an emotional driving experience. Without the Fury's bold experiment, would we have ever seen the golden age of muscle cars? Probably not. A legend among collectors' time has a way of turning flaws into charm. Today, the 1957 Plymouth Fury is one of the most sought-after classic cars in America. Enthusiasts don't see rust issues or factory defects anymore. They see a turning point in automotive history. Restorers dedicate years of effort to bringing these cars back to life. Finding a surviving Fury in good condition is rare, but for those who do, the reward is priceless. The sound of the dual exhaust V8 roaring to life, the way the push-button automatic transmission feels under your fingers, the presence of a design that once shocked the world. Collectors know this isn't just a car, it's a symbol of an era when automakers took risks, when designers weren't afraid to dream, when the future was something you could see, touch, and drive. And in that way, the Fury still lives on. Because the cars we drive today, the ones that turn heads, the ones that make our hearts race, they all trace their roots back to this machine. A car that predicted the future before the world was even ready for it. Every great car has a story, a moment when it stops being just a vehicle and becomes something bigger, a symbol, a legend, a machine that stays in people's minds long after it disappears from the streets. The 1957 Plymouth Fury is one of those cars. It wasn't just another model in Chrysler's lineup. It was a statement of ambition, of taking risks, of pushing beyond what people thought was possible. And because of that, it has earned a permanent place in automotive history. But how does a car truly become an icon? Is it the design, the performance, the impact it leaves behind? For the Fury, it was all of that and more. The cultural shift, when a car becomes more than a machine. The 1950s were a time of rapid change. The world was moving faster than ever before, and people wanted cars that reflected this new spirit. They didn't want the safe, conservative designs of the past. They wanted speed, excitement, and futuristic styling. The Fury delivered all of that. It wasn't just another car. It was a vision of the future, wrapped in gleaming chrome and sharp tail fins. It represented a break from tradition, an embrace of bold American confidence. This cultural shift made the Fury more than just a vehicle. It became a symbol of the era itself, capturing the imagination of a generation that believed anything was possible. And when a car reflects its time that perfectly, it doesn't just fade away. It sticks in people's minds forever. The Hollywood effect, how the Fury became a star. Most classic cars are remembered by enthusiasts, but the Fury, it became famous worldwide. A big reason for that? Hollywood. In 1983, the Fury became a legend on the big screen. Stephen King's horror novel Christine was turned into a film, and the star of the show wasn't a person, it was a 1958 Plymouth Fury with a terrifying mind of its own. The movie turned the Fury into an icon. People who had never even heard of Plymouth suddenly knew about this sinister-looking machine. They saw its low, aggressive stance, its glowing headlights, the way it dominated the road with presence alone. For car lovers, Christine wasn't just a horror film. It was a tribute to a time when cars had personality, when they weren't just built to be practical, but to be felt. Even today, decades later, the Fury's image is still tied to Christine. It's one of the most recognizable cars in film history, a reminder that some designs are so powerful, they never truly disappear. The collector's dream, why the Fury is so valuable today. Not every classic car becomes valuable. Some are forgotten, lost to time, but the 1957 Plymouth Fury, it has become one of the most sought-after cars of its era. Why? Because it represents something rare, a moment in history when automakers weren't afraid to take risks. It was part of Chrysler's boldest redesign ever. It introduced styling that was ahead of its time. It was fast, powerful, and exciting, everything a car lover could want. But there's another reason it's so valuable today. Survivors are rare. Many of the original Furies suffered from rust and poor factory build quality, leading to a high number of them being scrapped. Finding one today in original condition is incredibly difficult, and when something is both historic and rare, its value skyrockets. Today, a pristine 1957 Fury can sell for over $100,000, and even restoration projects command high prices. Collectors don't just see an old car, they see a piece of automotive history, a machine that once changed the industry and still commands respect decades later. The emotional connection, why the Fury still matters. Some cars are special because of their speed, others because of their design, but the Fury, it's special because of how it makes people feel. For those who grew up in the 1950s and 60s, it represents the excitement of a new era, when cars were full of ambition, when they felt alive. For younger enthusiasts, it's a lesson in boldness, a reminder that cars used to be designed with passion, not just efficiency, that automakers once dared to be different. And for collectors, it's a trophy, a car that carries stories, a car that, when restored, isn't just brought back to life, it brings back an entire era with it. That's why the Fury still matters, because it isn't just an old car, it's a symbol of a time when the future looked exciting, a time when every new car felt like a step forward, not just another model on the road, a time when driving wasn't just about getting from place to place, it was about feeling something, and that's something no modern car can ever truly replace. Some cars become famous for their speed, others for their design. But the 1957 Plymouth Fury, it was ahead of its time in ways that most people never realized. Because beneath its striking exterior, beneath the legendary V8 engine, the Fury introduced ideas that would shape the future of the automotive industry. Some of these innovations were recognized immediately, others wouldn't be fully appreciated until decades later. And yet, almost every car on the road today carries a piece of the Fury's DNA. It wasn't just a symbol of the 1950s, it was a glimpse of what was to come. Aerodynamics before it was popular. Most people think of aerodynamics as something that became important in the 1970s and 80s when fuel efficiency and high-speed stability became priorities. But the Fury was already ahead of the curve. Look at the shape of the car, the way the body flows seamlessly from front to back, the low-slung stance, the way the rear tail fins actually help guide airflow rather than just being decorative. In a time when most American cars were boxy and upright, the Fury took a different approach. Designers focused on making it look like it was moving even when standing still. And they weren't just thinking about style, they were thinking about performance. The sloped windshield reduced drag. The enclosed underbody panels helped improve airflow. Even the sculpted side panels were designed to minimize wind resistance. This was a radical approach for the late 1950s. It would take decades before other manufacturers fully embraced aerodynamics in mainstream cars. But the Fury? It was already setting the foundation. Push-button transmission, a glimpse of the future today. Push-button controls are everywhere in modern cars. Start buttons, drive mode selectors, electronic shifters, all designed to make driving more intuitive. But in 1957, Plymouth was already thinking ahead. Instead of a traditional gear lever, the Fury had a push-button automatic transmission. A small panel on the dashboard let drivers select gears with a simple push of a button, a futuristic concept that seemed straight out of a science fiction film. At the time, this was revolutionary. Cars had always used floor mount or column mount shifters, and many drivers were used to physically shifting gears with a lever. The idea of simply pressing a button to change gears? That felt like the future, and in a way it was. Though Plymouth eventually abandoned push-button transmissions due to mechanical complexities, the concept didn't die. Today's modern automatic transmissions, especially electronically controlled ones, are built on the same principle. Once again, the Fury had predicted what was coming. Power and weight, a new balance in the late 1000s. 950s, powerful cars usually meant big, heavy machines. Luxury cars from Cadillac, Lincoln, and Chrysler were known for their massive engines, but they were also weighing in at over 2 tons. The Fury took a different approach. It was lighter, yet just as powerful. Instead of relying on sheer size, Plymouth engineers focused on making the Fury quicker, more responsive, and more enjoyable to drive. The Golden Commando V8 produced 290 horsepower, a staggering number for the time. The lighter body meant better acceleration compared to larger cars. The balance between power and weight gave it a more engaging driving experience. This was a shift in philosophy. Instead of just making cars bigger and heavier, Engineers started looking at ways to maximize performance without unnecessary bulk. Fast forward to today, and this same idea is used in performance sedans, muscle cars, and even supercars. Lighter weight, more power, a better driving experience. The Fury was one of the first cars to prove that you didn't need a tank to go fast. A new approach to marketing selling. Excitement, not just cars before the Fury. Car advertisements focused on practicality. Spacious interiors, reliable engineering. Perfect for the whole family. Plymouth changed that. Instead of talking about fuel economy or trunk space, they sold a dream. The Fury wasn't just a car, it was an experience. Suddenly it's 1,960. The slogan suggested that driving the Fury was like stepping into the future. Ads emphasized speed, style, and excitement, not just comfort. Plymouth targeted younger buyers, positioning the Fury as a car for people who wanted to stand out, not blend in. This was the beginning of a new era in automotive marketing. Fast forward a few years and this same approach was used to sell the Mustang, the Camaro, and even modern performance cars. Instead of just selling transportation, car companies started selling lifestyle, passion, and personality. And it all started with cars like the Fury. How the Fury's innovations live on today. It's easy to look at the 1957 Plymouth Fury and see it as a product of its time. A car built for the optimism of the 1950s, a machine that belonged to the past. But the truth is, the Fury never really left. Its ideas, the aerodynamics, the performance philosophy, the futuristic controls, the marketing, they're all still here. Every modern muscle car owes something to the Fury's balance of power and weight. Every aerodynamic sports sedan follows the same principles first explored in the Fury's design. Every time you see a car ad that sells excitement over practicality, you're seeing the influence of the Fury's marketing approach. The Fury wasn't just a car, it was a pioneer. A car that looked ahead while everyone else was still thinking about the past. And that's why, even today, its impact can still be felt on the road. Some cars fade into history, remembered only by collectors and enthusiasts. But some cars leave an impact so deep that their influence can be seen decades later. The 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was bold, aggressive, and powerful. It challenged the status quo and set a new standard for performance vehicles. But what makes the Fury truly special is that it didn't just exist in the 1950s. Its DNA lived on. It laid the groundwork for something bigger, something that would dominate American roads for decades to come. The rise of the muscle car. It wasn't just about speed, it was about attitude. And that attitude changed the way people thought about cars forever. The muscle car formula, how the Fury set the stage. Ask any car enthusiast and they'll tell you the muscle car era officially began in the 1960s. The Pontiac GTO, Dodge Charger, and Ford Mustang became symbols of raw power. But the truth is the foundation for muscle cars was already being laid in the late 1950s. The Fury was one of the first American cars to blend full-size power with sportier handling. A big, high-sun V8 in a relatively lightweight body. A focus on straight-line speed without sacrificing design. A cocky, aggressive styling that made it clear this was a car meant for excitement, not just transportation. These were the same principles that muscle cars followed in the 1960s and 70s. The Fury's formula was simple, but effective. Power, presence, performance. The muscle cars that came after didn't invent this formula. They perfected what the Fury had started. V8 power. More than just a big engine. The 1957 Fury's Golden Commando V8 was more than just an engine. It was an experience. The moment you pressed the pedal, you weren't just driving, you were commanding a machine built for speed. The deep rumble, the instant surge forward. It was an entirely different way to feel the road. This wasn't just about horsepower, this was about making the driver feel something. That same philosophy carried forward into the muscle car era. The 426 Hemi in the Dodge Charger. The 428 Cobra Jet in the Mustang, the 455 Super Duty in the Pontiac Firebird. All of these legendary engines followed the Fury's approach. Big displacement, high horsepower, and a driving experience that felt alive. Even today, muscle cars like the Dodge Challenger Hellcat and Ford Mustang GT stick to the same core idea. Power shouldn't just move the car, it should move the driver. And the Fury was one of the first to prove that philosophy. A new type of driver, the birth of performance culture before the 1000. 950S, most cars were designed with functionality in mind. They were built to get from point A to point B. The average driver wasn't thinking about horsepower, acceleration, or top speed. But the Fury helped change that. For the first time, performance became part of the conversation. People weren't just looking at cars as transportation. They were looking at them as machines of excitement. Suddenly, car enthusiasts were more interested in quarter-mile times, horsepower figures, acceleration and handling. This shift in attitude gave birth to an entirely new type of driver, the speed enthusiast, the weekend racer, the thrill seeker. By the time the 1960S arrived, this culture had exploded. Drag strips became more popular. Street racing became a national obsession. Car magazines started ranking the fastest, most powerful cars on the market. And the Fury? It had already paved the way for this movement, styling that defined an era. It's easy to look at modern muscle cars and admire their design, wide stance, aggressive front grille, powerful rear haunches. But this wasn't a new idea. The Fury had already been doing it. The bold lines, the aggressive tail fins, the long, low body, every part of the Fury's design screamed confidence and speed. It was a car that looked fast, even when it was parked. This design philosophy carried over into the 1960S and 70S. The Camaro's sculpted bodywork, the Challenger's intimidating front end, the Chevelle SS's wide, muscular stance. The Fury showed the world that a performance car isn't just about numbers, it's about presence. A car should make a statement before the engine even starts. And that's something that still holds true today. The legacy of the Fury in modern performance cars, the 1957 Plymouth Fury, wasn't just another car from the past. It was a time machine that predicted the future. The things it introduced? Powerful V8 engines, aerodynamic styling, a focus on driver experience, became the foundation of performance cars for generations to come. Even today, the influence is still alive. The Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat follows the same big engine, bold styling formula as the Fury. The Ford Mustang GT continues the idea of affordable high performance for everyday drivers. The Chevrolet Camaro SS keeps the muscle car tradition of blending style with raw power. The Fury may not be in showrooms anymore, but its impact is on every road, every racetrack, and in the heart of every car lover who appreciates speed and style. It didn't just change cars. It changed how we feel about them. And that's why, even after all these years, the legend of the Fury still lives on. The car industry is built on competition. Every decade, automakers push the limits, trying to outdo each other with better performance, more advanced technology, and striking designs. But every once in a while, a single car comes along that forces the entire industry to rethink everything. The 1957 Plymouth Fury was one of those cars. It didn't just impress, it made other manufacturers nervous. It set new benchmarks in multiple areas. And what it introduced didn't fade away. It became the new normal. The car world before 1957 was one thing. The car world after 1957, completely different. And that's what makes the Fury legendary, the first truly aerodynamic American sedan. In the 1950S, cars were still following the design philosophy of the past. Big, boxy, and upright. Automakers weren't thinking much about aerodynamics. But then came the Fury, low, wide, and sculpted for speed. Chrysler's chief designer, Virgil Exner, had a vision. He didn't want cars that looked like rolling refrigerators. He wanted motion, even when standing still. The Fury's design wasn't just beautiful, it was functional. The sleek body reduced wind resistance, making the car faster and more fuel efficient. The tail fins weren't just for show, they helped stabilize the car at high speeds. The low-slung profile improved handling, giving drivers more control. Before the Fury, American cars were built like brick walls. After the Fury, automakers realized that aerodynamics mattered. By the 1960S, streamlined designs became standard, and today, every car on the road benefits from this shift in thinking. The Fury didn't just look different, it forced every car company to catch up. The birth of the performance-oriented family car. Before the Fury, performance cars were usually limited to expensive, low-production models. If you wanted a fast car in the early 1950s, you were looking at European sports cars or specialized American hot rods. But Plymouth did something revolutionary. They made high performance available to regular families. The 1957 Fury was not a luxury coupe. It was not a limited production exotic. It was a family sedan with the heart of a race car. 290 horsepower in a full-size vehicle, something unheard of at the time. Sport-tuned suspension, a setup that actually made a big car feel agile. TorqueFlite automatic transmission, one of the fastest, smoothest automatics of its time. This was the first glimpse of what would later become a common formula. Powerful sedans that offered both speed and practicality. The Dodge Charger R/T followed this formula in the late 1960 SS. The Chevrolet Impala SS refined it in the 1970 SS. The BMW M5 and Mercedes-AMG models perfected it in later decades. Today, we have cars like the Dodge Charger Hellcat and Cadillac CT5V Blackwing, four-door sedans that can hit 200 miles per hour. That idea started with the Fury. It proved that a family car didn't have to be boring, revolutionizing ride quality and comfort. In the 1950s, roads were rough, highways were expanding, and long-distance driving was becoming more common. But most cars still handled like wagons. They were stiff, bouncy, and rough on bad roads. The Fury changed that. Plymouth introduced a torsion bar suspension system, a feature that made the Fury more stable at high speeds, smoother over rough roads, more responsive in turns. This was a huge leap forward. At the time, most American cars used soft, floating suspensions that made them feel like boats. The Fury's system gave real control, setting a new standard for how a big American car should handle. It worked so well that Chrysler continued using torsion bars in their muscle cars and luxury sedans for decades. Even today, modern adaptive suspensions in high-performance cars can trace their roots back to innovations like this. The Fury didn't just make cars faster, it made them more refined and enjoyable to drive. The automatic transmission that changed everything today. Automatic transmissions are taken for granted. Almost every car has one, and they're more advanced than ever. But in the 1950s, automatics were still sluggish, inefficient, and not designed for performance. That's why the Fury's TorqueFlite automatic transmission was such a game changer. It had 3 speeds instead of 2, offering better acceleration. It shifted quicker and smoother than most other automatics at the time. It handled high horsepower without breaking down, something early automatics struggled with. The TorqueFlite became so legendary that Chrysler kept improving and using it for decades. It even influenced modern 8-speed and 10-speed automatics used in today's high-performance cars. At a time when manuals were still dominant, the Fury proved that an automatic transmission could be both smooth and sporty. That's a lesson the auto industry never forgot. The end of an era, but not the end of its influence. The 1957 Plymouth Fury didn't last forever. By the 1960s, Plymouth moved in new directions. The muscle car era took over, and the Fury evolved into a different kind of vehicle. But what it started? That never went away. It proved that aerodynamics matter. It introduced the idea of powerful, performance-oriented sedans. It showed that suspension and transmission technology could improve both comfort and speed. Every modern performance car, whether it's a Dodge Challenger, a BMW M Series, or even an electric sports sedan like the Tesla Model S, owes something to the innovations of the 1957 Fury. It was more than just a stylish classic, it was a blueprint for the future. And that's why its legacy still lives on today. What makes a car more than just a machine? What takes it from a mode of transportation to something legendary, unforgettable, and woven into the culture itself? The 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just a car that changed the industry. It captured imaginations. It became more than just metal and engineering. It became a symbol. Even today, nearly 70 years later, people still talk about it. Collectors hunt for it. Enthusiasts restore it. And its influence echoes across decades. Why? Because the Fury didn't just redefine cars. It became part of history itself. A design that left the world staring when the Fury hit the streets in 1957, it didn't blend in. It wasn't just another sedan in a parking lot full of chrome-clad giants. It was the car people turned their heads to see. The Fury's design wasn't just about performance. It was the definition of confidence. The tail fins were outrageous. They weren't subtle. They didn't whisper. They screamed speed, ambition, and futuristic thinking. The gold trim stood out. Unlike the over-the-top chrome that covered most American cars of the era, the Fury's accents looked sleek and sophisticated. The low stance and long body gave it a presence. It was unlike anything else on the road, almost like a fighter jet on wheels. This wasn't a car for people who wanted to go unnoticed. This was a car for dreamers, for risk-takers, for those who wanted to be ahead of their time. And that's exactly what it became. A car that represented the future, a movie star in its own right. Some cars get remembered because of their performance. Some because of their technology, but very few get cemented in history because they became Hollywood legends. The 1957 Plymouth Fury is one of them. Even if you've never driven one, even if you've never seen one in real life, you probably know the name because of one reason. Christine. Stephen King's novel, Christine, turned the 1957 Fury into something more than a car. It became a legend of the silver screen. A car with a mind of its own. A car that wouldn't die. A car that was more than just metal and gasoline. It was alive. When the movie adaptation was released in 1983, Christine cemented the Fury into pop culture history. Suddenly, an entire new generation of car lovers saw just how special the '57 Fury really was. Collectors started searching for them. Prices skyrocketed. The Fury was no longer just a classic, it became an icon of American film and car culture, and all of this decades after it first hit the road. The collector's holy grail. Ask any classic car collector about the 1957 Plymouth Fury and you'll get one response. It's a must-have. But here's the problem. They're nearly impossible to find. Unlike the muscle cars of the 1960s and 70s, which had huge production runs, the Fury was rare even when it was new. In 1957, only 7,438 were ever built. Most didn't survive. Rust, wrecks, and time took their toll. Finding one today, especially in original condition, is like finding a needle in a haystack. This exclusivity makes it one of the most sought-after American classics of all time. And for those lucky enough to own one, it's not just a car, it's a treasure, a piece of automotive history, a symbol of innovation, a car that represents an era when design and performance went hand in hand. When a Fury shows up at a car show, people stop and stare, not just because it's rare, but because it represents something greater, a time when cars were bold, beautiful, and truly unforgettable, a symbol of the American dream. Perhaps the biggest reason the Fury still matters today is because of what it represents. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement. The 1950s were a time of optimism. America was booming, highways were expanding, the middle class was growing. People believed in the future, and the Fury embodied that belief. It was a car built with ambition, one that refused to follow the trends of the past, and in many ways it still represents that spirit today, a spirit of innovation, a spirit of pushing boundaries, a spirit of daring to be different. That's why even after all these years, the 1957 Plymouth Fury is more than just a car. It's an icon of an era, a reminder of what's possible when bold ideas meet great engineering. Why the Fury's legacy will never fade. There have been thousands of cars over the decades. Many were good, some were great, but only a few became legends. The 1957 Plymouth Fury is one of them. It wasn't just about speed or design. It was about vision. It changed how cars were built, how they were viewed, and how they were remembered. It became a part of pop culture, a collector's dream, and a symbol of what made the 1950s such an incredible time for automobiles. Even today, when car lovers look back, the Fury still stands tall. It still represents the future that people in 1957 dreamed of. And that's why, more than half a century later, it hasn't faded into history. It remains immortal. What separates an ordinary car from a legend? Is it the design, the power, or something deeper? A combination of engineering, vision, and raw ambition? The 1957 Plymouth Fury wasn't just about looks. It was built to perform. Beneath its sleek, futuristic body was a machine engineered to push boundaries and challenge expectations. This wasn't a car for the cautious. It was a car for those who wanted to feel the road beneath them, hear the engine roar, and experience the thrill of true American performance. And in 1957, it delivered just that. The heart of the Fury, a powerhouse engine. For a car to be truly special, it needs more than just a beautiful design. It needs a heart that beats with power, and the Plymouth Fury had exactly that. Under the hood sat the Golden Commando 318 V8, a powerhouse engine that was more than just numbers on a spec sheet. 318 cubic inches of displacement, a serious figure for its time. Dual 4-barrel carburetors, a rare feature that gave it extra breathing power. 290 horsepower, making it one of the fastest cars on the road in 1957. But here's what made it truly special. The Fury wasn't just about brute strength. It was engineered for smoothness and control. The TorqueFlite automatic transmission was ahead of its time, offering seamless shifting and making high-speed cruising feel effortless. And if you preferred a more hands-on experience, Plymouth offered a 3-speed manual transmission, allowing drivers to truly command the road. This wasn't just another big American car with a V8 stuffed under the hood. This was a machine designed to move, to excite, and to give drivers an experience they wouldn't forget. Speed that left the competition in the dust. When the 1957 Plymouth Fury rolled onto the streets, it wasn't just competing with Ford and Chevrolet, it was dominating them. Plymouth engineers had fine-tuned every aspect of the Fury's performance, and the result was a car that could outrun almost anything on the road. 0 to 60 mph in under 8 seconds, a shocking number for the 1950S, a top speed of over 120 mph, unheard of for a full-size American sedan. Quarter-mile times that embarrassed other luxury cars of the era. For context, in the 1950S, most family sedans struggled to break 100 mph. Muscle cars as we know them didn't exist yet. But the Fury? It was already ahead of its time. Car magazines and automotive journalists were stunned. Plymouth, a brand often seen as the underdog, had created a car that could run with the best, and people noticed. Teenagers dreamed of owning one. Street racers knew its name. Even professional drivers respected its speed. The 1957 Fury wasn't just fast, it was a statement that Plymouth had arrived. Handling that changed the game. A car can have all the power in the world, but if it can't handle the road, it's useless. Plymouth understood this, and they built the Fury to be as refined as it was fast. Unlike many of its competitors, which focused on sheer size and comfort, the Fury introduced engineering that made it more than just a straight-line performer. Torsionaire suspension, a revolutionary system that gave the Fury superior handling and stability. A lower center of gravity, making high-speed cornering more controlled than most 1950S cars. Balanced weight distribution, ensuring that power didn't just go to waste but translated into real, usable speed. For the average driver, this meant a car that felt planted on the road. For speed enthusiasts, it meant a car that could take corners with confidence